Hello, bee people. You don't have to be in this craft very long at any level, beginner, sideliner, commercial guy, before you really begin to understand that an extractor is a fundamental part keeping bees to produce honey. Now, there are some beekeeping specialties, making splits, for instance, to sell, or shaking packages, that really don't produce that much honey, but for the rest of us, we really probably like some of the honey from our own apiary at some point. It's a common gadget. You know, it really hadn't changed very much from its earliest conceptions. In 1865, Major von Frischka from Venice, Italy, had the idea. Basically, it was a good luck event, as is recorded here in the 1899 issue of the ABC and XYZ of Beekeeping. He says that his little boy chanced to put a piece of comb in a basket to which was attached a piece of rope. With rope in hand, the boy began to whirl it, and the centrifugal force caused a few drops of honey to be thrown out of the basket around in the air. And the father, seeing it, was keen enough to see that in this was a fundamental principle, and became the nucleus of a big invention, and that it was not necessary any longer to smash the combs up and strain the honey out the old-fashioned way. He soon constructed a rude extractor that demonstrated the principal utility of the discovery, and shortly thereafter perfected the machine that is shown in the attached picture. I'll show you that later on in this program. He did all that in 1865. That really wasn't that long ago. And when you see the picture, you'll be stunned. It looks like a 4-frame extractor with crank and pulley. So not much has changed all down through the years with this principle. But we've started pretty humbly. Most early extractors were made for beekeepers with just a small number of colonies, and you cranked and cranked and cranked. Motors and gadgets came along much later. I'll discuss some of those. But finally, we're where we are now, today. I was surprised when I began this work. I thought you just went to the regular bee supply people. Extractors are now available from manufacturers all over the world. In the late 60s, early 70s, mid-70s, when I began to keep bees, we had a choice of maybe 8 or 10 models. There must be hundreds of these things now. So I'll try to take you through the walkthrough and show you some of the extractors that we have now, and some that are on the market. You know, interestingly, it's the same problem. How do you tie the thing down so that it doesn't wobble when you extract it? How do you deal with getting tired from crank, crank, crank? When is it time to get a new one? What kind of bucket are you going to have underneath? I don't think any of those fundamental questions have ever changed. So let's have a look, see what I can come up with to kind of show you how this thing evolved with the photographs and with some of the video that I've been able to come up with. And I hope it gives you a better understanding of the operation of this simple contrivance. Stand by. This is the photo I told you about that I was referring to. It's the very first extractor. It's the granddad of all of them from von Frischka's effort. It looks like an extractor, looks like it'd be easy to load, kind of close to the ground, and a small collecting pan. But otherwise, it's definitely an extractor. After this extractor concept was discovered and became obvious, I can't find the historical record. It must be there, but I just know that developments came tumbling all over themselves. I don't know that von Frischka ever got wealthy or made a lot of money from his design. Seems that that's how it always happens. But nonetheless, once somebody said that you can use centrifugal force to sling honey out of the comb, everything was possible. Some of the most spectacular extractors for what would be available for hobby beekeepers today were readily on the market. Kind of pricey, but they were on the market. I got some poor pictures of those. No doubt those things are still out there somewhere in somebody's barn or museum, but kind of hard to find now. So let's have a look at what I've got, and we'll talk our way through what must have been some of the golden years for hobby beekeeper extractors. It's not hard to see these old extractors. They're still available sometimes in museums or exhibits. Well made, heavy duty, crank up top for disengaging the crank handle, a brake lever there just underneath the crank handle, reversible baskets that would clang and slam when you banged them around and reversed them, but you didn't have to take the frames out. Their primary features were they were heavy and made to last. They had that brake that would also reverse the baskets if you partially stopped them. Upper and lower ball bearings, boy, they had to be cleaned out constantly. And all the galvanized metal had soldered seams. They were solid pieces of equipment. Ironically, these two extractors I'm discussing were not the top of the line. This 8-frame unit was just more of the same. More frames to be extracted at once, reversible baskets, use the brake, and the forward momentum would slam the baskets to the other side. You can see up top where you can cut it loose and let that top drive wheel turn. You can also see 2 pulleys there, one for the basket, one for the honey pump. So no frames must be reversed. Heavy duty friction drive clutch in the basket. Upper drive runs constantly. They both run off the same power shaft, and the handbrake reverses everything. Solid, well-made, old equipment during the Industrial Revolution type years. By the 1940s, extractors had been developed and redeveloped and modified, and already they were lightening or taking some of the heft off of these machines as early as at least by 1940. That's what I have the pictures for. So consequently, modifications were made all along the way and continue to be made today. I've got a series of photos that show the cycle of events. Actually in 1944, I think this was at Iowa State College. This is where this series of pictures came from, I believe. In 1944, on the back of one of the pictures, this shows 2 beekeepers using a 2-man lift to break apart these colonies and move them around. It was kind of a handy gadget, but I've used these things, and it's kind of a clumsy gadget because it's top heavy, and one guy's got to walk through those colonies to get out. So at least they get 3 colonies off at once, but I suspect every now and then that there's a comedy of errors that go on. Inside their honey house, after the honey is apparently off, they were using this vibrating horizontal steam-heated knife. I don't know when they quit, but Kelly and 1 or 2 other companies were still making this knife as recently as I think sometime during the 1980s. They may still have 1 or 2. The knife rotated sideways off an offset cam on an electric motor, and it was steam heated. Off to one side over here you can see the steam heater sitting around. It's also fairly obvious that even in 1944 they staged pictures, because there's no crud on the floor, there's no cappings everywhere here. There may actually be a little bit of steam coming out of that, but it looks like a nice frame that he's opening up. This uncapping rack was typical. There was plans for this thing everywhere, and you can see where the honey would drip, go down a metal pan underneath, and then drip out in the bucket over here. So for the day, fairly decent setup. Appears to be a 24-frame radio that is tied down with turnbuckles here on the side, and another here, and 2 probably on the other side, and then that's attached to a frame that was bolted to a wooden planked floor. These guys do look authentic in that they're dirty enough, but they're kind of neat and well groomed there for beekeeping, having to undergo this. You can see this guy taking the frame, putting it in. You can see this guy then taking frames out and putting them back in the empty supers over here. This pipe, we'll talk more about that later, is used to transport the honey over to the bottling area. By now, this had been greatly lightened. These pillars, when they were first manufactured, oh my stars, I mean, it was just industrial revolution machinery. But as time passed, the forging became lighter and lighter, and instead of levers and cranks that would do fairly interesting things, this would screw up and down to either slightly lift or to increase the tension of this drive pulley on the pressure plate here. So you'd spin the basket. I've used these machines quite a number of times, actually a lot, to get it going, and then lightly begin to screw down and torque this thing up. You tend to get honey on it, so every once in a while you had to wipe this off and clean it. Here's the brake over here. This is the flat belt that drives this, and then notice on the side is the secondary belt that also drives the honey pump that was sitting on the floor. In the earliest days, this was all driven, as I've already talked to you about, by a gasoline engine, but by now, electric motors were here to stay. So nice, heavy-duty equipment, but already being lightened and simplified. Look how much simpler that basket is. And the radial extractors now were really keen. We used to have a lot of these. I sound like I'm 100 years old, but I do remember these things, and they would go inside the extractor, and then periodically you would put in wax cappings, and then as your extractor was running, you'd also be slinging the wax out. So you'd sacrifice this space inside, but after it ran for a while, those wax cappings were remarkably dry. Photograph coming up behind that. But you did lose frame space, and secondarily, look how much wax capping you got to get out of. So somewhere along the way, they had a pretty good filter system going. Still, heavy duty, solid unit. I haven't checked now in 20, 30 years, but some of the bee supply companies still carried these clutch parts because these extractors were so enduring. They also sold for many years a clear epoxy that would be used to coat the inside of these tanks to shield some of the things that were there that you didn't want to be there. Then if these baskets laying outside, the photograph I told you about, you can see the semi-dry cappings that took that off, or took that out there. So that was a fairly standard procedure. I don't see it much anymore. And I would guess I don't see it much anymore because we have really good systems for bypassing this and not mixing all that in our honey. To the best of my knowledge, from only these pictures, I feel like a forensic beekeeper trying to figure out what these fellows were doing and how it was worked. This looks like a pipe that's coming from the extractor across the room, and if it is, that's a long run for a small pipe. It has a lot of cappings and stuff in it. So I was amazed at that, but maybe the pump could push it out. But I wonder what they did when that pipe became clogged. This apparently is some kind of filter bucket that would take out the coarse material, and how they knew when it was plugged. No sign of a ladder to get up and have a look, or that when it was filling. This appears to be an electric heated flash heater. Wouldn't really flash very much, but from these cords, if you follow those around, it looks like they're plugged in there. It would dump into this directional can that would let either this tank or that tank fill if you spun it around. There may have been a subsequent lighter filter in this too. And obviously things have changed, not the same picture, because here's their supers. And in the previous shot, they were all extracting deep hive bodies. I don't know why these would be sitting here over a drip pan unless they're just in storage. I don't really know why this would be here. Got any thoughts on that? But it's all set up. There's a drip pan underneath. Maybe they'd walk across the room and get these things. He's putting honey into 60-pound tins, and he's doing it with his shoes shined, white shirt on, so maybe he was the guy in charge. I don't know. That's the old AI Root logo on that equipment there. Stacking the supers up. Again, they're deeps, weren't deeps before, so good pictures. I'm glad I was able to show them to you, but this is kind of some stage shots here, but Who doesn't do that? If you showed the real thing, it'd be kind of cruddy. I like the extractor shot, but I really like this one. These times are gone, and I was in the thick of this. These are 60-pound tins. They were kind of miserable things to use. They really hurt your hand to pick up 60 pounds. And on occasion, that soldered joint would break off, and if your toes weren't out of the way, you'd drop a 60-pound can right on your foot. These were as common as dirt. There were literally millions of them across the country. And I would estimate that inside of 7 to 8 years, plastic round buckets overtook these things. There never was a square plastic bucket to use these with here. They always were square, these cans were, and the plastic buckets have always just been traditional buckets, so they take up a lot of room. I have no idea why they'd put 2 in these shipping crates and then stack these things 4 high. Who wants to stack this many crates with 120 pounds of honey that high? This guy in the white shirt and the polished shoes, I don't think that's happening there. So what this has been is a historical walk down the pathways of extractor evolution. You know, not much has changed. You still put extractors in. You still put frames in. They've still got to be tied down. They still wobble. You still get stuff on the floor. You still get cappings inside the honey. Everything that happened all along the way pretty much still happens today. We just use lighter, more efficient equipment, and don't mean to offend this guy in case he's at the meeting here right here and now, but yeah, apparently they dressed better in the old days, but look at the modern equipment that we're up to here now. So this is where we are. You can get some idea of the evolution and the development to get to this point. There always were larger extractors, but in the old days, nothing like we have today. Let's move on now to some of the more modern stuff that's available to us.
Hi, I'm Shane Gebauer with Brushy Mountain Bee Farm, and I'd like to talk to you today about our 9-frame radial extractors. I've got two here in front of me. Of course, one is motorized and one is a hand crank. Essentially, they're the same extractor, the only difference being how they're operated. Let's first talk about the hand crank. The hand crank has a spring-loaded handle on the side, and to engage it, you'll notice that if I just spin right now, my basket doesn't turn. To engage it, I have to push it in, it locks into the shaft, and now my basket begins to turn. And once I hit a certain speed, what happens is the basket almost starts to go faster than I can crank, and the handle disengages. It's sort of a safety feature so that you don't start cranking and end up hurting or injuring your wrist because it starts going so fast. And certainly you don't want to try and push this in while it's still spinning, because again, you can see that handle automatically starts to engage and can easily twist a wrist. So to stop it, to re-engage that handle or slow it down, there is a brake built into this extractor on the top right here. You push these two levers together and it applies friction to the shaft to slow the basket down. And that allows you to re-engage the handle. The motorized, of course, is motorized. It has a speed control on the top. This is a DC motor, which we actually have to invert from AC current to DC current. It provides more torque, which is necessary when you've got a basket full of honey frames. So to turn it on, you turn it on, and of course, when you start extracting, you want to start off slow and gradually increase your speed. And you may want to get it up to a certain speed and let it spin for a while to sort of spin out some of the honey from the frame so you don't end up actually blowing the foundation out from the frame. And typically, we find that once you get up to about 50%, this basket is spinning amply fast to sling the honey from the frame. Now, both these extractors are radial extractors, which means it's going to extract both sides of the frame at the same time. There's no need to stop the extractor, reverse direction of the frame, and start over again. It's doing both sides at the same time. With both these extractors, you want to make sure your honey gate's open while the extractor is spinning so that honey can drain out of the extractor and not fill up to the point where it might start to bind up on the basket. The construction of these extractors, food-grade stainless steel, any plastic components that may be inside in the basket or the honey gate's food-approved plastic. The gearbox on the hand crank does contain metal gears. There's another thing that is included with these extractors, and there are these baskets. There's 3 of them, and these baskets allow you to extract deep frames. Now, the deep frames fit into the extractor tangentially. So what happens is the frame sits in the basket like this, and it's actually easier to load once the basket's in the extractor. So this slides down in. Locks into place down there. There we go. And then the frame goes in tangentially. If you're doing deep frames tangentially, you will have to stop the extractor, lift it out, and reverse the frame so it'll do the other side. With medium frames, however, there's no need for the baskets. So you can take the 3 baskets out. And the medium frames, you always load the frames with the top bar facing the outside of the extractor. The reason for that is when bees build the comb, they tend to angle the comb up slightly so the honey drains down into the cell. So when you put the frame in, you want to have that angle working in your favor. So the top bar always goes out. And it just simply slides down in, and there's notches down in the bottom in which the frame sort of locks into. And so it does hold 9 frames, medium or shallow, and it does them radially. Inevitably, when you load up an extractor it's going to be out of balance a little bit. Maybe one frame on one side's really drawn out and the other, a frame adjacent to it on the opposite side, is not quite so drawn out and therefore a little lighter. That's going to create sort of a wobbling motion. And in fact, if I start this extractor with just that one frame in there, you'll see just how much an extractor can wobble. And this isn't just an empty frame. So as I speed it up, you can see it sort of shimmy and shake a little bit. And what may happen is if the balancing isn't close enough, it'll start to walk across the floor. So the legs of these extractors have holes in the bottom, and we do advise that you anchor your extractor. Now, many people are using these in their kitchen. You don't necessarily want to drill it and screw it down to your floor in your kitchen. But what you can do is maybe get a sheet of plywood and bolt it to the sheet of plywood, or an old pallet that you can attach it to. And that way you can stand on that, and that also helps stabilize the extractor. That's essentially it for the 9-frame extractor. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let us know. Contact us via phone or through the website. Thank you. Have a good day.
We would like to introduce a new line of honey extractors called Optima. Designed for those who treat beekeeping as their hobby, It is designed for those who maintain smaller apiaries or whose workshops are void of electric energy. All the honey extractors from this line are propelled by hand. The drum and the container in the machine is made from acid-proof stainless steel. The cone-shaped construction of the drum's bottom makes the flowing of honey easier during the spinning process. The cover of the hand propulsion mechanism is made from high-impact plastic, but the turned gears are made of steel. The container in the Optima honey extractor differs in construction from the containers used in other diagonal four-comb honey extractors. In the Optima line, the container's bottom is made from an acid-proof metal sheet. The honey extractor's legs can be screwed in, which gives the possibility of adjusting the height of the drum over the ground and eases the transport of the machine and its keeping. In the Optima line, there are 5 types of diagonal honey extractors: the 2-comb, the manual 2-comb with a sieve on the tank, and a 4-comb with a diameter of 500 and 600 millimeters. The 4-comb 600 millimeter Optima honey extractor has the possibility of spinning all types of frames.
Look at the extremes. This is where we started, and this humble prototype bears the exact same operating principle as the newer, most modern equipment that we have. On the other extreme, based on the same principles as that first extractor, this Calvin commercial unit represents one of the premier extracting systems made today. It's been a long but impressive trip. It's hard to know where to stop. When I assigned myself this project, I thought it'd be fairly easy. Look at some catalogs, go on the web, get some pictures, maybe find some video. Well, there's video everywhere. Not a lot in the US, so consequently I ended up showing a lot of international stuff. But the primary reason was because the international stuff simply had more video. But here's what I did find out. There are a multitude of really nicely made extractors across the world, certainly across the US, that are available for you. I didn't find any that are particularly cheap. They seem to have basic, solid prices that are probably affected by stainless steel, the quality of the motors, how they're wired, all those kind of things. But unless you're going to go to plastic and the really lightweight units that work for a while, you're going to have to pay to get the stainless steel stuff. You've got to decide. Look for one that you can clearly attach to the floor. They're always going to wobble. Look for those that are easy to break down so you can clean the top and bottom bearings. Look for those that are easy to load. Look for those that seem to have a quality makeup about them, heavy, bolted correctly, so that when you use this machine 25 or 30 years from now, or when some of your family members use it 25 or 30 years from now, that it's still solid, becomes a part of the family. I've enjoyed putting this together for you. I hope it helped in some way, and I really appreciate you watching. Thank you.